Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. My name is IRENA, and I am part of the innovation team at the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. Today, I have the pleasure of moderating the webinar, Dynamic Regulation and Digitalization for a Renewable Powered Future, organized jointly with CEER, the Council of European Energy Regulators. I am pleased to introduce you today's speakers. Dr. Annegret Grobel is the CEER president and also the director of international relationships at the German Regulatory Authority for Electricity, Gas, Telecommunications, Post and Railway in German Bundesnetzagentur. Francisco Boschel, our second speaker, leads the work on innovation for renewable energy technologies at IRENA. And Elena Ocenik is the IRENA expert working on country case studies within the innovation team. Welcome, everyone. On today's agenda, we have three presentations of around 10 minutes each, followed by Q&A session. We will first hear from Francisco, who will talk about the digital technologies and their implication for achieving a renewable power future. Dr. Grobel will emphasize on the need for a dynamic approach to regulation to enable the digitalization of the energy system and the energy transition. Last but not least, Elena will conclude with the importance of a systemic innovation approach for a successful energy transition. But before we start, I would like to walk you briefly through a few housekeeping items. All of you are currently muted and will remain so throughout the webinar. You can use the chat feature to introduce yourself and talk to other attendees. Please do so. If you have questions for the speakers, please use the dedicated Q&A tab in the webinar panel. We will be monitoring the questions throughout the session and select some to be answered by our speakers at the end. We will do our best to reply to as many questions as possible. The slide deck will be shared via email after the end of the webinar. Also, you may download the material for further reading that has been uploaded in the handouts section for you. A recording of the webinar will be made available within 48 hours. And last but not least, we encourage you to tell us how we did and to help us improve. Please fill in the survey that will be sent to you after the webinar. So let me start by introducing some opening remarks. In the innovation team at IRENA, we have been mapping and analyzing the emerging innovations that allow the integration of variable renewable energy, such as solar and wind generation. As these technologies are now cost competitive due to tremendous cost reduction over the last years, the challenge we see is integrating high share of variable generation in current power systems. So we mapped all this innovation. We observed that there are plenty of innovations in enabling technologies, such as battery storage, electric vehicles, electrolyzers that produce hydrogen from green electricity, and digital technologies such as Internet of Things, blockchain, artificial intelligence. However, innovation goes far beyond technology. We see also innovative business models emerging, such as peer-to-peer trading or aggregators. We see also innovations in market design that incentivize a more flexible behavior of all actors on the market, innovations in regulations that empower consumers, just to name a few. Also, we see innovations in ways of operating the system, with emerging practices that value more and more the complementarities between renewable generation, or innovations for operating an increasingly decentralized system. We have been mapping all this innovation in these dimensions, and we identified 30 key innovations for the integration of variable renewable energy in the power systems. All these 30 key innovations are included in the main report that was launched last year, called Innovation Landscape for a Renewable Power Future. In addition to the main report, last week only, IRENA has published the 30 innovation briefs, completing the power sector innovation toolbox for countries. Each of the briefs discuss each one of the innovations, each of the 30 innovations identified. Each of the briefs provide a brief description of the innovation, explain how much this innovation supports the integration of renewables in the system, what is the status in terms of deployment, and brings concrete examples of projects implemented across the globe. They are all available from IRENA website free of charge. So the aim of this toolbox is to support countries in considering new and innovative solutions to address their own challenges, transform their power sector centered around renewables. Please feel free to go to our website and download this repository of information. But without any further delay, let me hand the microphone to our first speaker of today, Francisco, who will focus on the innovations in the digital technologies. Francisco, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, IRENA. Next slide, please. Yeah. Well, we see that the ongoing rapid increase in the penetration of renewables in power systems is being propelled by three trends. From the supply side, we see decentralization, with many and scattered small generation units connected to the system, for example, rooftop PV and behind-the-meter batteries. Now, from the demand side, we see electrification of energy applications that currently use direct combustion of fossil fuels, like, for example, electric cars and heat pumps, resulting in many new and scattered loads connected to the power system. With this decentralization and electrification, new actors like consumers are emerging in power systems, along with many new assets connected to the system, generating and demanding electricity. So these trends increase the complexity of the system. And if they are not well managed, they may result in significant additional investment needs and bottlenecks to keep increasing the share of renewables in power systems. So here is where the third trend comes into the picture: digitalisation, which can be defined as converting data into value for power systems. It is crucial to optimize and manage in a smart way more complex electricity systems, making decentralization and electrification a source of flexibility instead of a burden for the power system. So there are many types of digital technologies like digital twins, virtual and augmented reality, etc. But now I would like to say a bit more about three concrete digital technologies being used to support the integration of renewables in electricity systems. Okay, we already have the slide. So the first one is Internet of Things. So with the smart devices now able to gather data from each one of the appliances producing and consuming electricity, those appliances have also become data sources, as shown on the slide with the purple dots. IoT role is the collection and transmission of such data at the demand side level, as we see in smart home applications, for example, but also to a system level, aggregating and making the data useful not just for to manage localized applications, but also to optimize the whole power system. Now, flows of electrons are followed by flows of bytes managed by data centers. Next slide, please. The second technology to mention is artificial intelligence. As we can now have access to big amounts of data from all those smart devices, we can now use the data to make fast and smart decisions in benefit of the system. This is the role of artificial intelligence. In our analysis, we have identified 6 concrete AI applications being pursued by actors in power systems to support the integration of renewables, as you can see on the slide. From the generation side, better generation forecast. From the transmission and distribution segment, support operation and maintenance of grid infrastructure. From a demand side perspective, and improve forecast of demand patterns, and also to untap demand side management approaches. And a complete system level, there are projects now focused on optimized use of energy storage connected at different parts of the system, and finally, an emerging application to optimize market design and operations. Next slide, please. And the third technology, digital technology to mention, is blockchain or broader digital ledger technologies. As mentioned, data can be used to make decisions to optimize the system, but those decisions should result in transactions involving different parties. For example, charging my EV at certain time and price, or reducing my air conditioning demand and being compensated for that. So those kind of transactions can be automated by meeting certain criteria, and they need to be implemented and securely recorded. All of this is also known as smart contracts. That can be done using different approaches, but as the number of transactions increases exponentially, it may become difficult to have a third party managing all those transactions. Here is where distributed ledger technologies can play an important role to securely manage those smart contracts with a lower overhead cost. As shown on the slide, DLT projects related to renewable power systems are mainly looking into peer-to-peer trade and grid management at the moment. But other emerging applications that may grow very fast in the future include electric vehicle charging, renewable energy certificates, and financing renewable energy projects. Next slide, please. This graph here summarizes the main role of those three digital technologies that we have discussed so far for renewable-based power systems. Again, AOT for data collection and communication, then artificial intelligence on fast and smart decision-making, and then DLT or blockchain and on automated, secure, and large amounts of transactions. Next slide, please. In IRENA, we have identified hundreds of pilot and demonstration projects using those three digital technologies in power systems. In our recently published briefs on those topics, we actually document around 100 of those projects, explaining the type of application and the impact of those projects, as you can see as a sample in the table on the left side of the slide. But in general, what we can say is that concerning the hardware, there is a fast increase in the deployment of smart devices from around 30 billion today to expecting more than double or 75 billion devices to be connected to internet in the next 5 years. Most of the identified applications are focused on demand-side management. And in terms of investments, also we see a rapid growth. For example, investments in blockchain for energy may grow from around $1 billion today to more than 6 billion by 2025. Looking at the whole system application, more interest is paid now to market applications, like the Euphemia project, looking into artificial intelligence to integrate 25 country day-ahead markets in the European Union. Concerning geographical distribution of those projects, the European Union is a front runner in digitalization projects in energy with a large concentration of projects in this continent. But we see more and more projects being pursued all around the globe. And it's also worth to mention that transmission system operators are also now more and more interested in using digital technologies to operate and maintain their assets. Next slide, please. I would like to conclude by highlighting what we see also from our discussions with experts as the key factors to foster digitalization in energy. One is unlocking the benefits of digitalization for regulation, supporting a more dynamic regulation by having access to real-time data for decision-making, but also enhancing transparency and engagement with all the new actors in the market. The second is the need to continue improving the performance of digital technologies, making digital applications faster while constraining their cost and energy consumption. The third one is the development of the needed physical and digital infrastructure, as well as the harmonized standards to ensure the interoperability between all these digital technologies. And finally, addressing the issues concerning cybersecurity, particularly identifying and managing the most vulnerable points, as well as data privacy. As obviously, if there is no willingness to share data, then there is no digitalization. So the need to facilitate access to data while ensuring that data privacy concerns are properly addressed. And to learn more on how to address all these issues, there is definitely value in supporting demonstration projects as well as regulatory sandboxes to be able to understand how to address all those issues. So I would like to stop here. Thank you so much.
Francisco, thank you very much for your presentation and for sharing all these insights with us. Let us jump directly to the second presentation and see what this digital application and this digital technology in the power sector mean for regulators. Dr. Grover, the floor is yours. I think you are muted. We don't hear you.
Thank you.
Now
I think you should hear me now. Thank you. So I would like to look at all this from a regulator's perspective, and I thank Francesco for presenting the technology side so well. We can see it on the next slide. The scheme that should now show, and you see there are three bubbles, if I may say so, which all relate to the new role and responsibilities of the regulator. It is important that we are not, of course, the core business is still the grid, and I have mentioned here this also as already having a smart grid, but regulators now also always have to be aware of the interplay of liberalized markets, and it is very important that we have this, let's say, pro-competitive regulation, and that is ensuring then that regulation is a set of rules and responsibilities for all participants. I come back to this in the next slide, and the important thing is that now the system gets more flexible and is able to integrate an increasing share of renewables, both in the grid and in the market. And that is, I think, the new role of regulation, and more specifically also then of dynamic regulation. And some of the keywords that that Francesco introduced already, you see them also in the little boxes here. So in the interest of time, I would move then to the next slide, where I outline a little bit the regulatory principles and the system as a whole. So all in all, that we have seen in the last few months, and also in our last webinar, the fundamental regulatory principles of in liberalized markets worked well and have proven to work well. And the whole system, the energy system as a whole, remains stable and strong with the existing legislation in place and the application of regulation by the regulator. So we have to ensure that the targets that are linked to the energy transition, so namely increasing the increasing share of renewables, are implemented and are supported by a regulation that also becomes more flexible, while of course always keeping in mind that we have at the core of the system a grid, a smart grid, so to speak, of course, meanwhile, but the grid as such still remains a natural monopoly and therefore requires regulation, but it must fit with dynamic markets and with the focus of making this market work for all participants. We have new participants like aggregators and prosumers. We have more active consumers, so empowered consumers, and that is part of our regulatory responsible to ensure that consumers benefit from the new chances, from the new system, from the new flexibility, while the protection, that consumer protection that has been reached is not undermined, and in particular that also those consumers that may not be so active are not left behind and are continued to be protected. I think that is very important here. And as was mentioned already, consumers are not only anymore on the, let's say, receiving end of the system like it was before. They take an active part with demand side management, and therefore they also bring benefit to the system. So we have an interaction. It's no longer a one-way street, but it is a two-way interaction. and consumers also contribute, if the framework is set correctly, to grid stability and system stability as a whole. So that is, I think, important what we have to say here. And CEER has tried, which is shown on the next slide, to highlight this in our so-called 3D strategy. Again, I'm not going into too much detail. The 3D implies digitalization for, of course, in the consumer interest, and that is, let's say, relying on the technology that was mentioned previously, and let's say that mainly leads to a smart system, smart grid, smart consumers, smart meters. Of course, that is important here. These are some of the elements that make the system more flexible from the technology point of view. And I think it is important here also to look ahead a little bit, that this is the initial stage, but that already also starts working. So as you rightly say, artificial intelligence or blockchain or IoT, they may optimize this, but they are not, let's say, at the necessary at the first stage. I think that we should also mention. So the system starts working here, but of course we need to implement these digital elements that I mentioned. The whole part relating to green, making the energy system green, but also the having a green economy, we put it in terms of decarbonization at least cost. So making the transition in a cost-effective manner. And again, this also has a relation to a benefit for the consumer. So decarbonization cannot be a objective in its own, but we have to implement decarbonization in the most efficient way. Again, a link to an economic principle, and that means having market rules in place that deliver on the most cost-effective technologies in a system that provides efficient price signals here. That is the important, of course, on a regulated basis. Please don't forget, the grid is a natural monopoly and stays a natural monopoly and needs ex-ante regulation, but it is an interplay with the functioning, well-functioning markets, because otherwise the benefits will not be translated, will not be delivered to the consumer. So that is, I think, an important aspect here. And we try now to capture this third element of regulation, making regulation also more flexible, more adaptive to these changes of the system, while steering it also. We call it dynamic regulation, which means a coherent approach, also still based on fundamental regulatory best practice, which we try to gather in the Council of European Energy Regulators, as well as, of course, in close cooperation with ACER, the Agency of the Cooperation of Energy Regulation, to ensure that we implement well these principles in order to enable and contribute to the transition to a green energy system, to a decarbonized and carbon-free, ultimately carbon-free energy system, with the right mixture, let's say, ultimately of technologies and or an interplay of well-functioning markets and adaptive regulation. Yeah, so that is the, let's say, the scheme as a whole. And on the next slide, you see how we have tried to lay down some principles for this in a conclusions paper that we published last October, where we have outlined core elements of a sustainable energy regulatory strategy on digitalization in the energy sector. And you see the bullet points there. The first thing is trying to set the scheme in such a way that ultimately the markets provide the right price signal and therefore allow market-based, the procurement of market-based flexibility, which is a very, very important aspect, and encourage DSOs to use more flexibility. So not only to build ever more grid, yeah, that was the old style solution, but to buy more flexibility from the markets and also from prosumers, from consumers that are offering now also flexibility. That of course requires setting right flexibility products and empowering consumers for demand side flexibility. So the system must be implemented. You must have you must set the scene as a regulator, of course, and the legislator, of course, and then you have to where you have a level playing field of all these different actors. But you also have to set and empower consumers, incentivize consumers to use the system, because that is not an automatic game. You have to ensure that they make use of it, for example, with dynamic pricing contracts. I'm not sure you would need blockchain for this. I mean, you have already in the Scandinavian countries a lot of pricing flexibility of contracts with dynamic prices, and it works. But it is an interplay of certain devices, of course, of a set of rules, but also of consumers that are, let's say, making use of these new possibilities. So that has and that depends enormously on the trust that consumers can put in the system. And that again is something that of course relies on, for example, ensuring that the data flows are seen as secure, so that there's no attack, and that privacy is also data privacy is also protected. Again, that is a question of data management, and the regulator here has to see who, for example, operates a data platform where you exchange this. Yeah, this is something again where the regulator has a core function to play to ensure that the roles of each of the players are set correctly, and each one takes the responsibility without using it as a means, as a lever for an unfair advantage, because then markets get distorted and the price signals are no longer efficient. So that is very important. And of course, if the system is dynamic and is functioning, then of course it also fosters innovation. Yeah, so that's here important. With this, I come to the next slide, where I have described the changing role of the regulator a little bit further, and also to summarize it. So as I said, the regulator has a responsibility here to support the energy transition, to ensure integration of renewables in the grid and in the market, in a more flexible energy system, which technological wise, of course, requires a digitalized energy system. The regulator is trying to incentivize this with a dynamic or adaptive regulation. Still, of course, as I said, having a market-based whole system approach, looking at the whole system and looking from a customer-centric perspective, So no longer only looking at operators. Of course, they should not be forgotten. As I said, the system still relies on a smart functioning grid that enables, that allows to have all the trading, etc., on a physical basis, so to speak. I'm saying this because clearly the regulators want to make the system stable and integrate renewables, decentralized energy with a interplay of markets, of well-functioning markets for the benefit of consumers. But we neither want people to go off-grid. Yeah, that is not the idea of a whole system approach. Nor do we want to, let's say, to have a substantial part of transactions outside the market. Both of these things, in particular for vulnerable customers, function only in a system that integrates, let's say, all players on the basis of a well-functioning grid and well-functioning markets. And I think that is what I want to say here. And the regulator has here the role of the overview, which is shown in the last in my nearly last slide. So on the next slide, where I've tried to visualize this a little bit, trying to explain or to show on the one side that we have a smart market, that we have a smart regulation, that the system, the different bubbles that you see are based on a digitalized system. So the digitalization gives the ground for a smart grid, for smart consumption, based on smart meters, of course, but you also have, of course, smart generators. And the whole thing only works if these elements work together under a regulatory oversight that we call whole system approach and application of dynamic or adaptive regulation. So regulation that is moving based, of course, on best regulatory practice and still remaining predictable. It's not a system that is getting arbitrary in any way, that picks up the movements, incentivizes them, in that way is predictable because it is based on the regulatory principles that I mentioned at the beginning, but that is flexible enough to steer the system in a dynamic way, because the system as such becomes more flexible and needs to be steered in a dynamic way rather than in a command and control strict static way, as was the case in the old world. We have recently published, and you see this on my last slide, a number of papers on this. As you can see, not only the 3D strategy and the digitalization conclusions paper that I mentioned already, but also this year already a paper on electricity tariff design on the DSO level that contribute and support the energy transition. The procedures for the procurement of flexibility, the whole system approaches, and we also looked at cybersecurity and also participated in a number of consultations of the European Commission on their diverse strategies. And we continue to work together with the Commission on this to try to implement and influence the thinking from a let's call it modernized regulatory approach that looks at the whole system without losing out of sight the central target, and that is that the benefits are brought to the consumers, and that is to all consumers. So that is our, let's say, message that I wanted to give. And all the All the publications, you can find them on our website, www.ceer.eu. Thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you very, very much for your presentation, Dr. Grobel. That was very insightful and very informative. We have seen that digital technologies bring new applications in the power system, but market design and regulators are key to enable that these are correctly implemented and the right incentives are in place and the right price signals are sent to all the actors in order to increase the flexibility in the system, to operate the system better, and to enable higher share of renewables. So thank you very much for that. That was very, very, very informative and very insightful, as I said. And now let's jump to our last presentation of today. Elena, who will present what other innovation are needed besides enabling technologies and the market design, and what is systemic innovation. Elena, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Arina. Thank you very much for these very insightful presentations. Indeed, I would like to walk you through our systemic innovation concept. And we observe a growing number of countries that are raising ambition in terms of the share of renewable sources in their national electricity mix. And of course, there are very well-known examples which are hydro-based, like Brazil and Norway, but we see increasingly countries that are increasing the share of variable renewable energy sources, meaning solar photovoltaic and especially wind power. And indeed, there are countries that are aiming even for 100% renewable power in their electricity mix in the next 2 or 3 decades. As is the case for Sweden, Spain, and Denmark, just to mention a couple of them. What's interesting is that we already have experience from some countries like Costa Rica and Uruguay that already have 100%, actually 99 and 98% renewable power in their system. Now, in order to, obviously this comes with challenges. So in order to integrate these resources into the existing power system, some specific challenges need to be tackled. And IRENA's Innovation Landscape project, which you can see here on the screen, composed on the one hand of the main report and the additional 30 innovations, are the underlying foundation of what we call the systemic approach. And indeed, this can be used as a toolbox by policymakers in the different country context. And last year, at the request of our member state, in collaboration with the Swedish Energy Agency, we have conducted a case study on Sweden. And to follow up on this work, we are also conducting right now 5 African case studies. This work is ongoing and it will be a relatively lighter touch compared to the Swedish study because we have more countries in a short period of time to do that. Now let's have a look at why innovation and systemic innovation is so important. So we heard this before, that in the traditional electricity supply chain, energy would flow in one direction in exchange for money. And this meant that the flexibility was basically provided by the generators only. So in a nutshell, generation was following the load. However, we are moving towards a more complex power system where there is a new paradigm in the electricity supply chain, and we have information flowing in all directions. But what's also interesting is that we have the energy flow being bidirectional as well as the monetary flow. So what we will see tomorrow is a more flexible system where we unlock this potential across the transmission and distribution system, but also on the demand side. So if we take a step back from digitalization, and if you look at the bigger picture, this is how the innovation landscape looks like, the landscape to integrate variable renewable energy sources. What you can see in blue on this chart are in fact the enabling technologies, and here you can find the digital technologies, and every single number in this chart refers to one of our innovations, and Arina mentioned at the beginning we also have a brief for each of these if you want to learn more. And today we also discussed a lot about what we can see in this chart in red, which refers to the market design innovations. But there are 2 other dimensions as well in this landscape. So you see in green, in fact, the business models that on the one hand empower the consumers, and enable renewable supply. But also in purple, you can see the system operation innovations. And here the key message is that indeed the innovations are abundant, but they do not emerge in isolation. So we need to apply a more systemic approach to this. And how can we do this? Let's have a look how everything fits together like the pieces of a puzzle. We see emergence technologies that enable the integration of renewables. We've heard this also today quite a couple of times. But in order for the system operator to really benefit from this, the key question is, how do we monetize the value created? And in order to benefit from this and to reap the benefits provided by the new technologies, we would need to design regulations to incentivize investments. So here we're speaking from our point of view about innovations in terms of market design and regulation. And adapting the design of the markets to the changing paradigm in the power system, this is very important to accelerate the energy transition because it creates the adequate revenue streams for the emergence of new business models, which can be used to invest further in enabling technologies. So here we are closing the virtuous loop. So we're having a positive feedback loop. And in certain situations, the private sector can identify directly a business opportunity and implement and use those enabling technologies, but this is not necessarily always the case. So this picture is what we call adopting a systemic innovation approach. Now let's have a look at a concrete example. In the study we have conducted last year, one of the four innovative solutions that we looked at is this one. So here we refer to the system-friendly integration of distributed energy resources. And this is crucial for Sweden in order to achieve the desired policy target of 100% renewable power by 2040, but this solution has also applications in other countries. So just as a reminder, the distributed energy resources are the small and the medium-sized power sources located at the low and medium voltage networks. So here we speak about electric vehicles, we speak about rooftop solar PV power plants, behind the meter batteries, and so on and so forth. And this solution, what it does actually, it aggregates the distributed energy resources to optimize the distribution system operation. It also helps with the balancing, the demand and the supply, but it also helps to manage congestion. And we heard this right now as well, that in the old paradigm, we would just invest and expand the transmission network system. But now we can also benefit from this new decentralized resources. And what you can see in this chart is that in order to come up with a solution, with an innovative solution, we need to combine various innovations. And in this concrete example, you see that we have 13 innovations across the 4 dimensions that I mentioned before. So you can find the 3 digital technologies that were the key topic of today's webinar. You can see Internet of Things, artificial intelligence and big data, as well as blockchain as part of the enabling technologies, although you can see some others there, like EV smart charging and behind the meter batteries. We also spoke a lot about sending the right price signals to consumers, and this can be done via time of use tariffs under the market design category, which are also called dynamic tariffs. So we're speaking about the same thing here. But 2 other categories, again, which I would like to highlight, is the fact that business models will also play a key role. So aggregators are the actors that will help transform the passive consumers into active prosumers, so consumers that are actually generating their own electricity, in addition to new ways to operate the system. And if this is too abstract, in our work, we provide very concrete examples of cases where these innovative solutions are being implemented, are being trialed as well. So because we looked last year at Sweden, we have provided examples from there, but we have also, in addition to that, we have also provided case studies from the international experience to foster the exchange of lessons learned. So please have a look if you would like to learn more about this. And I would like to leave it here, and I'm very much looking forward to an interesting discussion. So with this, thank you very much for your attention. IRENA, back to you.
Thank you very much, Elena. That was very insightful presentation. Indeed, we at IRENA, we are working a lot with systemic innovation. We're trying to send the message that innovation is needed in all these dimensions, and only together we can achieve a practical on-the-ground solution. We have built this framework in the Innovation Landscape Report for a Renewable Power Future, and now Elena, actually, it's working on application for this framework in different countries. But let's us jump directly on the panel discussion and the Q&A session. We have 15 minutes left, so that will give us the opportunity to answer a few of the questions. To break the ice for this part of the webinar, I will start with a question that was actually posed at the end of our previous webinar that we organized also with CEER in June. That was actually more related to the topic of this webinar. So we will answer this question now, as promised back then. The question, I think it's more targeted to you, Dr. Grobel. And it's like that. To what extent dynamic regulation has played a role in the increase of renewable electricity shared to almost 50% during the lockdown period in Europe? I can repeat if needed.
Yes, thank you for this question. And yeah, we have seen an enormous increase in use of renewables and production of renewables. And this showed that the market design was functioning because due to the lockdown, prices dropped. On the other side, the renewables are usually associated with low marginal costs. So the merit order naturally then came at the lower price, and with this, all the cheap renewable energy resources feed it into the market, and then their share increased as a result. And I think that also shows that renewables are increasingly competitive, and that I think is a very nearly a turning point, because at the very beginning of renewables in Germany, for example, it was more or less 20 years ago when our first Renewable Sources Act entered into force. There was this necessity of high feed-in tariffs, for example, so of support of renewables. And now we see that they have become competitive, and that we don't need these type of support, of heavy support, distorting prices anymore, at least in a number of areas. And that is exactly also what the Clean Energy Package for all Europeans is signaling, that the price signals should now efficiently steer the use of energy, and that is in more and more in renewables. So the market design and its implementation, and of course with all the underlying grid that is necessary to transport these renewables, for example, from wind energy, offshore wind energy to the onshore grid, is now being built. And obviously the mechanisms incentivize its actual use. So I think that is a very positive design, and the lockdown has accelerated and let's say shown in the limelight these developments, which otherwise I think would have also been reached, but maybe later, much later in time. But what we can see, for example, in Germany, is a very continuous growth of the share of renewables. And I think that again backs what I just said. And yes, there was now this let's say speed up effect, let's call it, from the lockdown. So two elements on the supply side and on the demand side, resulting in a lower price, and that then gave an efficient signal for renewables to come in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this. Well, in the meantime, we have gathered plenty of questions from the audience. So let's start with this one. Maybe mostly for Elena and Francisco especially, I think, but everyone can jump in and complement each other at any point. So with all the digitalization taking place, demand for data centers has exploded. There is an ongoing debate on very high energy use of blockchain transactions as well. What is your view on this, on the increasing demand due to digitalization?
Thanks, Arina. A very good question indeed. As we discussed before, the performance and energy consumption of digital technologies is getting more attention. But actually, well, first of all, indeed, digital technologies or data centers are becoming a main energy consumption area. So actually today, data centers consume around 200 terawatt hours of electricity per year, which is more or less 1% of all the electricity generated globally. And some expect that this could increase even to 8% in the next 10 years. However, there are other developments which make data centers a quite interesting area. For example, the power capacity of data centers in the last 8 years has increased by more than 600%. However, their energy consumption has increased only 6%. So there are the idea that data centers power capacity is directly linked to their energy consumption is wrong. Another very important thing is the strategies that IT companies are taking in this energy transition. For example, IT companies are in the top of the companies that procure more renewable electricity through PPAs. IT companies are also relocating their data centers in locations with cold environment for cooling purposes, but also with low-cost renewable energy. Data center technologies are now also looking into providing services to electricity grid, especially in terms in the form of demand response and being compensated for that. And they are actually also, for example, coupling their energy waste in terms of waste heat with, for example, district heating systems. Yeah. So actually, we see at all of these strategies that they're implementing, they are actually becoming more like a role model for other industry sectors on the innovative strategies that can be implemented to actually minimize their energy footprint, but at the same time actually enable higher shares of renewables in power systems.
Thank you very much. I also have here a more provocative question that maybe it's a good follow-up also for you, Francisco. Someone is asking, do you really think that blockchain will play a critical role in the future? It seems that there is a lot of hype around it, but it's 3 years of talk and there is not yet many concrete cases of practical implementation to his knowledge. So could you comment on
that? Again, that's a very good point. And I think I mentioned, and Dr. Grubel also mentioning, when we look at digital technologies, of course, our ultimate goal is not digitalization per se, but it's actually with a purpose, right? And the idea that the use of digital technologies is needed from very early stages in let's say, the evolution of power systems is also maybe not the most accurate one. The question is, when does it make sense to use these digital technologies to optimize power systems? And in the case, for example, of blockchain technology, basically all the applications that we discuss, electric vehicle charging, peer-to-peer trading, operation and management of grids, all of those can be done without blockchain, all of those. So why blockchain then? Then is the cost-benefit aspect. When systems are becoming more complex because you have such a number of units connected to the system, and a third party which has the authority to overlook and let's say define the criteria and define when these contracts are enforced and how they're enforced is becoming unmanageable. You need new tools, and to do it in a secure manner, blockchain provides certain features which are very interesting and useful. For example, the security of the recording of the ledgers is very important. Yeah? The speed on how these transactions can be done is also a very interesting feature from a blockchain. So the question is, when you have the threshold, when the number of transactions and complexity of those transactions reaches a point when you really need a new tool to actually be able to manage and optimize this system. So we think that all these technologies, including blockchain, will play a more and more important role. Actually, there are not few, there are more than 180 projects of blockchain projects currently focused on power systems, so it's not small. And the aim or the expectation is that one, is that in the future, we have to anticipate and be prepared when this complexity is so big that these tools will be needed immediately.
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive answer. I hope that the one who asked it, it's happy with the answer. Let's start shift a little bit the focus of the questions. I gathered. Yeah, sorry.
Just to add, because I think you pointed rightly out that it may be more important in the future with more complex systems, and there I agree, and hopefully then by then also the, let's say, energy efficiency is increased, because I think that was mentioned also in the question. Today the relationship between let's say the value added and the energy consumption to calculate all these options is very, very low. Yeah, it's very inefficient. The relationship is, or productivity, if you like, is not very effective. So I think for the technology to make really a change and to make and to create value added to an extent that justifies these high energy consumption, even if it is more effective in the future, I think the relationship must very, very much change.
May I react quickly on that one, because Dr. Gould's points is very important on the energy consumption, and this is also a conception about blockchain, because most of the people have in the mind when they discuss blockchain, Bitcoin mining, for example. And that is done through let's say, an approach which is called proof of work. And this is a very energy intensive application. But now the new applications using distributed ledger technologies, especially in the energy sector, are a different technology using something different, which is called proof of authority. So it means that the system has not to be validated by all the users, but actually there start to be certain points, and that reduces the energy consumption of those applications by more than 100%, 100 times even, sorry. So I think that also the technology and the way they are functioning is learning by doing, and the learning curve, as Dr. Gould said, needs to continue to be accelerated to make the cost-benefit ratio positive and make these applications functional for a reliable power system.
Very interesting point and very interesting discussion. We are approaching the end, but I have so many questions, so I will just keep a little bit more the question and answer session open, because I wanted to shift a little bit the focus. We had received many questions on developing countries, and someone is actually curious about what are the 5 African countries that we study, that Elena is implementing the systemic approach framework, but also if the other panel members want to jump in, there are questions about how applicable are these new technologies in these markets of developing countries, and how deployable are the digital system in emerging economies, and how do you see this? Because it's clear in Europe the discussion where it is, but it's not as clear how this will evolve in emerging economies. So please, maybe Elena, you can start, and then whoever wants to jump in.
Yes, Arina, thank you very much for this question. Indeed, I haven't listed the countries, but we are looking right now at the following 5 countries. We're studying South Africa, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Rwanda. So because we have a very short time frame and 5 countries, not only one, we are applying a higher level approach to this, but we are looking at these countries and we're hoping that we will publish this work this autumn. So please keep an eye on the space if this is of interest to you. So I think we're at the beginning, at least from an innovation point of view, from the work that at least I have been conducting recently, we're at the beginning of scoping this work, but I can already share a couple of points. So yes, this framework is, so far, by testing it, is applicable also in the African context. Because at the end of the day, today we focused a lot on blockchain, especially from the question that popped up, and regulating markets. But we have to also think that in Africa, we have very diverse countries in terms of the power sector structure. They're also liberalized markets, although they're also vertically integrated markets. So, and also when we look at the enabling technologies, we found, for example, blockchain applications, if we stick for 1 second with this example, in South Africa being trialed since 2016. So basically crowdfunding the ownership of solar, of units of the solar power plant, and then in exchange of the megawatt hours generated, these coins, the solar coins, were exchanged into actual money. And we also found other examples, like the German car makers entering Rwanda and testing the e-mobility. They're also having plans to implement similar pilot projects in Ghana. So I think there's more. We're just scratching the surface, but there's more to be done in this area. And I would like to stop here because I'm aware that there might be other questions, and maybe Francisco and Dr. Goebel would like to complement this. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe to complement from all these projects that we have looked at in the context of our innovation landscape project, we have identified several in emerging economies and developing countries. Of course, quite a number from China. India, for example, quite some use of artificial intelligence to improve generation forecast from variable renewable energy generators, but also, for example, in Chile, the use of testing of a blockchain to use PV systems to provide ancillary services to the grid and make those transactions. In Colombia, for example, peer-to-peer trading in a rural community, and we have more of those examples. So it's clear that as any other digital technology, even abroad the energy sector, once it is developed, the smart applications will come globally. The one thing is to develop the technology, and the other thing is to have the smart application using such a technology. And there is a lot of creativity and innovation in developing and emerging economies that will certainly take advantage of those digital technologies.
Thank you very much both for this answer. Dr. Goebel, you?
Yeah, maybe I just compliment. Maybe I just compliment by saying that I agree. There are a lot of different ways to move ahead with this energy transition, and in the Council of European Energy Regulators, we try to learn from each other. And because some NRAs already now implement so-called regulatory sandboxes to see what needs to be done from the regulator's point of view to enable these new technologies within a set of rules within the system as a whole. So that is always the balance that we need to find to allow innovation, to give room for these new developments, without, however, let's say, forgetting about the stability. And you mentioned system operation of the system as a whole. So there is a balance to be struck that need to be borne in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We are a bit short of time, but I will just add a last question because we have received so many interesting ones. Maybe also from the regulatory point of view, there are some questions. And someone is asking, what are the regulations around aggregators? How, are there any blockages to the growth of the virtual power plant? It is clear that this is the main vehicle for the consumers and prosumer to contribute to the power system in general, to provide services. So there are questions about the regulation, about how is the regulation about these new actors?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thanks for the question. There are new provisions now in the clean energy package, in particular the electricity directive that need to be transposed and then implemented. And again, there are very diverse developments. I would like to mention one element of the current framework of the current regulation that could act as a barrier that may require adjustment, that is certain tariff structures, which probably won't allow aggregators to jump in. And of course, the role and responsibility of the aggregator as some sort of intermediary has to be defined, and that is what now is being looked at. And I would like to mention, so there is not, let's say, the new role or the new player needs to fit in the system, needs to be fitted in the system, and that's what we now try to look at. And maybe as one key word which is currently being discussed very much, and the way it can be interpreted is about the energy community, and that is a term that is used in the electricity directive, and also the community according to the renewables energy directive. So there are slight differences, and that is where we are looking at. And some countries are advanced, while others still have to, let's say, introduce the concept and see how it can fit into the different set of players, which are very diverse in the different member states. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very well summary. Very good summary. Well, I'm afraid we have reached the end of the allotted time, actually a bit over time. So I will like to end here the Q&A session. That was a very good and insightful discussion. I really enjoyed it. I hope you all did. Let me introduce you to the next webinars where we can continue the discussion on different topics. So for those who would like to know more about our work, we have our fortnightly IRENA Insights webinar series, and the next one will be on 18th of August on reaching zero with renewables in transport and industry sectors. Then we will have another joint webinar with Malaysia, where we will discuss about peer-to-peer electricity trading in Malaysia and in Southeast Asia especially. On 25th of August. The link is also available for you to register already. We will organize on the 26th of August another joint webinar with Enlit Europe, where we will look at our 30 innovations in a more holistic way, and we'll see how to reach on renewable power future with the systemic innovation approach. And last but not least, this October, we are organizing an IRENA Innovation Week, virtual edition this time, due to the current circumstances. IRENA Innovation Week, it's an IRENA event that we organize every 2 years. This will be the 3rd edition, and it will focus on renewable solutions for transport and industry. More information are also available on the link, but also the slides will be shared, and you can check more in detail. We reached the end of this webinar. I would like to warmly thank our speakers for all the captivating presentations and the very, very insightful discussion. Thank you very much, Francisco. Thank you very much, Dr. Grobel. Thank you, Elena. And also, I would like to thank all the audience for having asked plenty of very good questions. Goodbye and see you soon online.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.